Malcolm Reaves stood frozen as his fifth-grade teacher dropped his hand-wrapped Christmas gift into the trash, right in front of the class. She laughed, called it cheap, and moved on like it was nothing. But someone had filmed it, and months later her name would be trending worldwide, right under a $100,000 donation made in his honor. But what no one saw coming was who sent the money. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Maple Hill Elementary sat quietly at the edge of St. Louis, the kind of school people called diverse without ever asking what that diversity actually felt like for the children who lived it. The December air outside was sharp and cold, frosting the edges of the old windows as the fifth graders buzzed with restless excitement. Winter break was only hours away, and the annual holiday celebration was the one event nearly every child looked forward to. Christmas music played softly in the background, decorations clung to the walls in mismatched colors, and students carried small wrapped gifts they had begged their parents to buy or made themselves with clumsy hands and hopeful hearts. In the center of this cheerful chaos stood Miss Penelope Carrington, her blonde hair curled tightly, her red sweater pristine, her expression fixed with the polished smile of someone who enjoyed being admired. She moved between desks with a brightness that felt forced, especially to students who had learned to read the difference between warmth and performance. To some children she was delightful, to others she was a figure of unpredictable judgment. Among those who watched her carefully was 10-year-old Malcolm Reaves. Malcolm sat in the second row, his small hands folded over a gift wrapped in recycled newspaper comics. He had smoothed the wrinkles with great care that morning, and though the wrapping looked uneven, every corner carried hours of effort. His mother had slipped a piece of twine around it before placing it gently in his backpack. Malcolm kept checking to make sure the twine hadn't come loose, as if the strength of the knot held together more than the gift inside. Unlike the louder students who bounced in their seats, Malcolm stayed quiet, his gaze soft and observant. He had always been different, more sensitive, more thoughtful, more aware of the tones adults spoke in, even when they said nothing hurtful directly. He was an artist, even at 10. His notebooks were filled with sketches of people, buildings, imaginary places, and the feelings he never had the courage to speak aloud. This gift mattered to him for reasons no one else knew. He had chosen it himself, a plain white mug from the dollar store, one his mother said was simple but nice. But Malcolm wanted it to be more, so he had taken a silver Sharpie and carefully written the word hope across the front, decorating the sides with small symbols that meant something only to him: tiny stars, a feather, a swirl that was supposed to be wind. It wasn't expensive, but it was heartfelt, and for a teacher who taught him every day, he thought it might be enough. The gift exchange began with laughter, as students opened presents from their peers. Cheap toys, candy bags, glitter pens, each reaction was loud, playful, full of the kind of innocent chaos teachers pretended to dislike, but missed during summer break. As the pile of gifts shrank, the students' eyes slowly shifted toward the front of the room, where Miss Carrington was preparing to open the gifts they had brought for her. "All right, let's see what we have here," she said with a rehearsed brightness, lifting the first neatly wrapped box from her desk. "I can't wait to see what my wonderful students picked out." The room hushed with anticipation. She opened a scented candle from one student, a small snow globe from another, a gift card from a girl whose parents worked at a bank. Each time she responded with dramatic delight. "Oh my goodness, this is lovely. How thoughtful. This is just perfect." Her smile grew wider with each gift, but Malcolm's chest tightened. He could hear his heartbeat in his ears as she reached for the next item. Only 2 gifts remained on her desk, one wrapped with shimmering paper and gold ribbon, and one wrapped with the wrinkled newspaper comics tied with twine. He knew which one was his. Miss Carrington picked up the gold-wrapped box first, turning it in her hands with obvious interest. It was from a boy named Tyler, whose parents owned a popular local restaurant. She unwrapped it slowly, savoring the moment, and revealed a pair of designer hand lotions. Her smile softened with true appreciation. "Well, this is beautiful," she said. Malcolm's stomach sank. He tried to steady his breathing, repeating in his mind what his mother had told him. A gift's value is in the heart that gives it, not the price they paid. But he had heard enough comments at school to know that not everyone believed that. Finally, Miss Carrington reached for the last gift, the one Malcolm had placed gently on her desk that morning. Her fingers hesitated on it. The twine dangled awkwardly. The newspaper wrapping exposed a corner where the ink had smudged. She knew exactly who it belonged to. "Whose is this?" she asked. though her tone made it clear she already suspected the answer. Malcolm raised his hand slowly. "It's mine." Something subtle shifted in her face. "Of course," she murmured. She pulled the twine off with minimal care and opened the paper. The mug appeared, slightly uneven in Sharpie markings, but full of earnest effort. "Hope," she read aloud, tilting her head. "How creative." A few students exchanged looks. A couple of them snickered. Miss Carrington held the mug between two fingers, the way someone might hold something fragile but unwanted. "Did you make this?" "Just the drawing," Malcolm said quietly. She smiled, but it wasn't kind. "Well, it's definitely thoughtful." The word hung in the air like a judgment. Then she added, lightly but loud enough for the class to hear, "Not everything needs to be handmade, sweetie. Sometimes it's okay to give something a little more polished." A few kids laughed openly this time. Malcolm stared at the mug, feeling his face heat. I thought you'd like it." She let out a soft scoff. "It's a cute little gesture, Malcolm. But well, maybe next year you'll try something more appropriate for a teacher. All right?" The laughter grew louder. Malcolm swallowed hard, his throat tightening. I didn't have." "You don't have to explain yourself," she interrupted, smiling as if she'd said something comforting. "But let's set this aside for now." She turned, walked toward her trash bin, and casually dropped the mug inside. The crack wasn't loud, but Malcolm felt it through his bones. A few students gasped softly. Others fell silent, suddenly unsure if they had witnessed something harmless or something crueler than they had words for. But the damage was done. A single gesture had created an invisible fracture in the classroom, one no holiday celebration could repair. Miss Carrington clapped her hands. "All right, everyone, back to the festivities." But the joy had shifted. Even the Christmas music sounded thinner. Malcolm stared at his desk, blinking fast to keep tears from falling. His chest felt heavy, like something precious had been taken from him, and stomped on. When the bell finally rang, children rushed out, but Malcolm moved slowly. As he zipped his backpack, he saw the trash bin again. The mug lay cracked at the bottom. He had known he didn't have much, but he hadn't known how painful it could be to be reminded of it so publicly. He walked home silently that afternoon, each step heavier than the last. Kenya would ask about his day, and he wouldn't know how to answer. His drawings wouldn't comfort him tonight. His heart felt bruised in a way he didn't have words for yet. But something else stirred beneath the sadness. A small, unfamiliar spark. He didn't know what to call it yet. He didn't know what it would grow into. But he felt it. And that night, as he lay awake staring at the ceiling, Malcolm made a vow no child should ever have to make. He decided he would never let anyone make him feel small again. But he had no idea how far that vow would take him. Malcolm walked home from school that day with the slow, dragging steps of a child who had aged years in an afternoon. The cold wind brushed against his cheeks, but he barely felt it. His backpack seemed heavier than usual, not because of the books inside, but because of the weight of humiliation he carried with every reluctant step. Each moment from the classroom replayed in his mind, the laughter, the snickers, the crack of the mug as it hit the bottom of the trash bin. He tried to swallow the memory back down, but it rose in his throat like something sour. By the time he pushed open the door to the small apartment he shared with his mother, the sun had already begun its early winter descent. Warm light spilled from the kitchen, where Kenya was stirring a pot of soup. She turned when she heard him enter, smiling instinctively, her face softening the way only a mother's could. "You're home, baby," she said warmly. "Cold out there?" Malcolm didn't answer. He slipped past her quietly, dropping his backpack near the coat rack. Kenya noticed how he moved. Stiff, muted, distant. Not the way a 10-year-old should walk into a warm home after a holiday celebration. Something in her chest tightened. A familiar ache that mothers of black children knew too well. It was the ache that came when they sensed something had targeted their child. Something unfair, something sharp, something they couldn't protect them from. "You all right?" she asked gently, laying a hand on his shoulder. He flinched, not from her touch, but from the memory that haunted him. "I'm fine," he said, barely audible. But Kenya knew fine was a word children used when they were anything but. She watched him shuffle toward his room and close the door without another word. It wasn't like him. Malcolm was quiet. Yes, but he wasn't hollow. Not like the. Something was wrong. She stood there, spoon still in her hand, listening to the silent apartment. A mother always knows. She put the spoon down and walked slowly to his room, pausing outside the door before knocking softly. There was no answer. "Malcolm." Sweetie? You want to talk to me? Silence. She pushed the door open. He sat at his small desk, his sketchbook open in front of him. But instead of drawing, he stared at the blank page, unmoving. The pencil lay untouched beside him. Kenya's heart dropped. Her son never sat in front of a blank page. Drawing was his world, his language, the one place where he felt strong and talented, and seen. For him to leave a page untouched meant something inside him had collapsed. Baby, she whispered, moving closer, tell me what happened. He shook his head. Nothing. Malcolm, I know you're nothing. This ain't it. His shoulders trembled slightly. Kenya sat beside him on the edge of the bed, waiting, giving him space, letting silence do the work. After a long moment, he whispered. She threw it away. Kenya looked at him, her brow furrowing. Who? What happened? He swallowed hard. My gift. Your gift? The one for your teacher? He nodded. A slow, sinking dread settled into Kenya's stomach. She could feel the truth forming before he even said it. She said it wasn't good, Malcolm murmured, voice cracking, and she threw it in the trash in front of everyone. Kenya inhaled sharply, her chest burning. She reached for his hand, holding it with a tenderness that masked the rage rising inside her. What did you give her? A mug, he whispered. The one we bought. I drew on it. I wrote the word hope. I wanted her to like it. His voice broke on the last word. Kenya felt her heart splinter, not just from his pain, but from the deeper truth beneath it. She had scraped together every dollar she could that week, managing bills, rent, groceries. She remembered picking up that mug and thinking it wasn't much, but it was something. And Malcolm had added his own touch, believing it would matter. To hear how it had been dismissed, mocked, tossed aside, felt like a knife twisting inside her. Oh baby, she murmured, pulling him gently into her arms. I'm so sorry. Malcolm's small frame collapsed against her, and though he didn't cry loudly, she felt the shaking, the silent kind of heartbreak that lodged deep in a child's soul when they realized the world saw them as less. Kenya closed her eyes and breathed slowly. She wanted to march into that classroom. She wanted to confront the woman who dared to crush a child's dignity like it was nothing. But she also knew the truth she had carried for years. Black children rarely got the benefit of the doubt. Calling attention to the situation could backfire, painting Malcolm as sensitive, overreacting, or worse, disruptive. She had lived through the system long enough to know how it punished the wrong people. Did she say anything else to you? She asked carefully. He nodded without lifting his head. She said I should get something more appropriate next year. Kenya felt heat rise behind her eyes. That woman ain't got the heart God gave a pebble, she whispered under her breath, though not loud enough for Malcolm to hear the anger coating her words. But he heard the tightness in her voice, and he lifted his head just enough to see the expression on her face. She didn't look angry at him. She looked furious at the world. For a moment, the weight in his chest lifted ever so slightly. I'm sorry, he said suddenly. Kenya froze. For what, Malcolm? Look at me. What are you sorry for? For embarrassing you, he whispered. For giving her something cheap. The word cut through her like glass. She grabbed his face gently, forcing him to meet her eyes. You listened to me. You didn't embarrass me. You hear me? That gift came from your heart. That's worth more than anything money can buy. What she did tells me everything about her, and nothing about you. He blinked, absorbing her words, though the damage inside him was still raw. Kenya stayed in the room, long after he stopped speaking. She sat beside him until the soup in the kitchen went cold, until the winter sun fully disappeared and the streetlights flickered on outside. She didn't push him to eat. She didn't push him to draw. She let him exist in the quiet ache of his feelings because she knew forcing him to move on would only teach him to bury the pain, and she didn't want him to learn that. Over the next week, Malcolm returned to school, but something in him had shifted. He no longer raised his hand during lessons. He kept his eyes down when Miss Carrington spoke. He didn't laugh at jokes or volunteer to read. He did his assignments quickly, quietly, mechanically. His teachers noticed the change, but only a few wondered why. Miss Carrington didn't seem to notice at all, but Kenya noticed. Every day after school, she asked him how it went. His answers were short. Fine. Okay. Nothing happened. But she saw how he retreated into himself a little more each day. The spark that had once lit up his drawings dimmed. Art no longer poured out of him. It trickled in hesitant strokes. Yet beneath the silence, something else was forming. A tension, a heat, a quiet fire. He was hurting, yes. But the humiliation had planted something dark and powerful inside him. Not bitterness, but a kind of resolve that children weren't supposed to know so young. He began drawing late at night again. Not people, not buildings, not dreams, but shadows, shapes, something abstract that looked like a storm building without rain. Kenya saw them once when he left the notebook open, and it made her chest tighten. It looked like a heart cracked open. Months passed. Life returned to its routine rhythm. The pain didn't vanish, but it settled beneath Malcolm's skin in a way that became part of him. He grew quieter but sharper, observant, determined. He carried the memory of that day like a scar across his spirit, one no one else could see, but one he felt with every heartbeat. Then one afternoon in March, as Kenya sorted through unpaid bills at the kitchen table, and Malcolm worked silently on homework beside her, her phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at it casually, and froze. The sender was the school district. The subject line made her blood run cold. It read, "Incident report circulation, immediate attention required." And when she opened the email, the first image made her gasp so sharply that Malcolm looked up in alarm. March arrived with a brittle chill in the air. Though inside Maple Hill Elementary the atmosphere held something far colder, exposure. It had been weeks since the mug incident, and Malcolm Reaves had settled into a new kind of silence, quiet, watchful, distant. But then, without warning, a short video appeared online and shattered the fragile equilibrium. It began as an ordinary clip. A classroom, the chatter of children, the teacher at her desk. Then came the microphone's whisper-like capture of the words. "It's a cute little gesture, but maybe next year you'll try something more appropriate." The voice was unmistakably Miss Penelope Carrington. No names were mentioned in the post. No student identifiers. Yet the camera angle, the classroom layout, the faint voices of the students, all pointed unmistakably to that day, that gift, that moment. The video swept across TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. Within hours, thousands had seen it. Hashtags sprang up. On Hope Mug. Fire Miss Carrington. Black Kid Gift. Shame. The video's tone was raw, unedited. A class full of children froze when the words landed. Malcolm's voice quiet. His gift thrown away. The moment lingering. Across the internet, Black creators posted reaction videos. One influencer detailed how micro-racism in schools often goes unseen. The kind where a teacher doesn't reach for empathy, but contempt, she said. Others reminded viewers, it's not just the mug, it's the message, that you're not good enough, that your effort is small. The comments flooded in. Some parents recognized the classroom setting and tagged local news outlets. Some alumni of the school reported similar experiences. One former student wrote, "I'd forgotten how much it bruised me until I watched this, and the adult doing it didn't even realize it was hate." Meanwhile at home, Malcolm sat in the living room with Kenya. Her phone buzzed repeatedly. She glanced at the screen and saw notifications piling up. In one hand she held her son's homework book. In the other she gripped her phone tightly, the cords of her second job on the counter buzzing like a reminder of everything she still had to do. "Mom," Malcolm whispered, his voice hollow. "Is that about me?" Kenya took a breath. I don't know for sure. But yes, I think they're talking about you." Her heart pounded. The guilt slashed through her like a blade. Had she done the right thing sitting silent? Should she have spoken earlier? She swallowed hard and reached for Malcolm's hand. Neither of them knew how to feel. Relief? Vindication? Or dread? At school the next morning, the air vibrated with a different energy. Teachers gathered in the staff room, coffee cups in hand, staring at their screens. One teacher whispered, "Have you seen it yet?" Another nodded, her face pale. In the hallway students whispered. A few who had only known Malcolm as the quiet kid approached him with tentative nods or whispered, "I'm sorry this happened to you." He offered nothing in return, his face masked. Miss Carrington's entrance into the building was greeted with something she rarely encountered: avoidance. Children who once greeted her with waves now looked away. Parents waiting at the door avoided her eyes. The principal's expression when she passed him in the corridor was constrained. That day, a meeting was called in her classroom, an official one. She was told to stay behind while the students left for their next period. She saw the school district media flag on the bulletin board outside the door, and felt something tighten inside her stern posture. An unexpected twist emerged when an anonymous email reached the school board. It contained a longer video, this time recording not only the comments, but the students' responses. The snickers, the gasp, the shifting in seats. It also included a second image. Malcolm standing alone, his gift bag empty, his eyes cast downward. The sender wrote, "You claimed you didn't know about racial bias. Here's proof you dismissed one of your students." The board, which had until now remained neutral, erupted into quiet conversations behind closed doors. Attorneys were consulted. The word investigation floated like a ghost through hallways. Back at home, Kenya took a deep breath and studied the screens on her phone. The news alerts were mounting, local reporters speculating, parents commenting on social media. She looked down at Malcolm, who sat with his sketchbook open but untouched, wearing the same quiet shadow he had worn for weeks. "Malcolm," she said gently, "how are you doing?" He didn't look up. "I'm okay," he said flatly. She knew that voice, one she didn't like. It was the voice of someone who'd stopped expecting kindness. She squeezed his hand and left the room, letting him have the silence he wanted. The investigation into Miss Carrington took a public turn. A local TV station aired footage of the viral clip and interviewed parents of other children who alleged subtle racial slights in the school. The school district released a statement. "Maple Hill Elementary is committed to fostering a respectful, inclusive environment. We are reviewing the matter thoroughly." The carefully chosen words applied to many things, but did they apply to Malcolm? Did they acknowledge the harm done? Malcolm watched the segment with Kenya. The piece ended with the anchor saying, "We reached out to Miss Carrington but she declined to comment." Malcolm's stomach tightened. Declined to comment. He realized then what he had suspected. The teacher tried to hide. But here was the twist no one expected. Rather than wait for the investigation to play out quietly, Miss Carrington posted a short video of her own on a private account, later leaked. In it she defended herself. "I never meant to belittle any child. The remark has been taken out of context. I have given my life to education. I will not be judged on a 5-second clip." The tone was firm, defensive, but beneath it something else floated: fear. She looked into the camera with a hollow eyes-wide stare, the way someone sees themselves for the first time as a villain in someone else's story. That video spread, and the narrative shifted from teacher mocked gift to teacher under siege. Some claimed cancel culture gone too far. Others saw it as accountability. The conversation fractured. On social media, Malcolm's story became a lens for parental fears, for teacher burnout, for racial injustice embedded in classrooms. Meanwhile, Malcolm's own internal world spun in a way he couldn't articulate. He had wanted justice. But as his image, albeit anonymous, became part of a viral movement, he felt exposed. The eyes of the internet were on him. He'd never asked for that. He just wanted his teacher to accept his gift, to see its meaning. Instead, he became a symbol. The camera didn't capture his side. It didn't show his late nights drawing, his mother working 3 jobs, the quiet hope that mattered. It only saw the moment of humiliation. Malcolm realized the world could simplify his hurt into a hashtag. That scared him more than any teacher's mockery. Kenya watched him that night, as he gazed at the ceiling, unspeaking. She wondered whether the online storm would bring him relief, or deeper damage. "You know," she said quietly, "you did nothing wrong." He turned, looked at her now. "I did," he said. "I should have chosen a better gift." The normal mother's impulse was to correct him, to reassure him. But she recognized the pattern, so she said, "The gift was fine. The one who judged it was not." He nodded, but the weight in his eyes did not shift. As the national media picked up the story, the school district announced an emergency meeting for parents and staff. A letter went home. "Upcoming event. Please attend." Some parents were excited, others were scared, angry. One white mother asked if her child had been in the same class as Malcolm. She needed to know if her daughter had witnessed something. One black father sat shaking his head, remembering his own childhood. The chairs in the auditorium filled quickly. Cameras streamed, microphones appeared, and in the center of it all, still silent, Malcolm and Kenya sat together, his sketchbook unopened in his lap. And then came the moment that changed everything again. A young local reporter, doing a live feed outside the school, announced she had obtained an unabashed confession, a recorded voice memo from a student in Miss Carrington's class, saying they had filmed the mug incident because they thought it was funny and didn't know it mattered. The reporter named the student's grade and school affiliation, not Malcolm's name specifically, but enough to identify the class. The crowd outside the school erupted. Some shouted accountability. Others cried, "This is harassment." Miss Carrington walked out of the school building, her face pale, avoiding the microphones. Inside the auditorium, Kenya looked over at Malcolm. His pencil hovered over the sketchbook, ready but not moving. She placed her hand on his back, not to push him but to share the space of the moment. He drew in a steady breath and opened the book. He sketched a single line across the page, thin, dark, and then traced a mug at the center of the line. Underneath, in fine letters, he wrote "Hope." On the next page he drew the same mug, shattered. The two images faced each other. They held his pain and his defiance. In that moment it became clear, he was not only the victim of the girl's mockery, he was now part of a larger fight. But the fight was not one he had chosen. Miss Carrington's resignation was still days away. But the momentum had shifted. The video, the voice memo, the hashtags, they had changed the terms. What had begun as a humble gift went viral, and Malcolm's life shifted from the background to the center of a storm he didn't fully understand. And yet he remained quiet, still watching, still feeling as though someone else was carrying the microphone for him. He wasn't sure if he was watching justice unfold, or watching himself become a spectacle. In the hallway later that night, two students approached him. A girl he'd never spoken to handed him a folded paper. On it was a drawing of the mug, with hope and a note, "Your gift mattered." He couldn't speak, only nodded, and tucked it into his pocket. That small act, unexpected kindness, made him breathe again. But it also raised a question he couldn't ignore. If his classmates could see him that way now, what had they been thinking before? Kenya watched the news cycle as it churned, saw the teachers' lawyer statements, the parent protests, the social media storms. She felt protective, proud, exhausted. She knew the next days would determine more than just disciplinary action. They would determine how Malcolm saw himself in the world. Would he feel empowered or crushed? Would the teacher's mockery shrink him, or would the viral response free him? And yet, beneath the surge of support and outrage, a darker possibility emerged. What if the attention itself was another trap? What if Malcolm's story, his mug, his pain, his art, became something others used to push agendas, while he remained unseen? He thought of his sketchbook's blank pages, and the jagged lines he had drawn in the dark. He realized something else. The mug hadn't just been mocked. It had been made into a symbol, and sometimes symbols devour the people they represent. Then, at the height of the viral wave, Miss Carrington made a desperate decision, one that would change the trajectory of everything. By the time the press conference was announced, the story had already outgrown the walls of Maple Hill Elementary. National outlets picked it up with headlines like, "Fifth grade gift shamed by teacher goes viral," and "Hope mug incident sparks anti-racism debate in schools." Commentators debated policy. Think pieces emerged. Some called for restorative justice, others for termination. Malcolm's name never appeared officially, but his image, especially his drawings, were shared widely enough that friends of friends began to put it together. Miss Carrington stood at a small podium inside a conference room rented by the school district. The walls were bland, the chairs mismatched, and the lighting harsh, but truth had no place to hide here. Behind her, the district superintendent, a few members of the school board, and two attorneys flanked her like human buffers. Reporters filled the rows. Flashing cameras lit the space every few seconds. Social media was already streaming it live. She wore a modest gray blazer. Her hair was pulled back tightly, and her expression was calm, but not humbled. Calm in the way people rehearse, not reflect. When she began to speak, her tone was steady. "Good afternoon. I want to take a moment to address the video that has caused hurt and confusion across our community." She paused, not for emotion, but for effect. "It was never my intention to hurt any student. What was captured was an unfortunate misunderstanding, and I deeply regret how it may have been perceived." Kenya sat on the couch, her eyes locked on the television. She watched as the woman who had crushed her son's spirit stood beneath lights and cameras, offering an apology that bent around accountability like a river avoiding rock. She never said Malcolm's name, never mentioned the mug. Not once did she admit what she'd actually done. "I've spent my career committed to education," Miss Carrington continued. "To lifting students up, to creating opportunity. This moment does not reflect who I am or what I stand for. But I acknowledge the concerns raised, and I take responsibility for the impact it has had." Kenya scoffed. "Impact," she repeated, her voice tight. "Not the act, the impact." Malcolm sat beside her, small and quiet, legs tucked beneath him, arms folded tightly around his middle. His eyes were fixed on the screen, but his face betrayed nothing. His expression had hardened in the weeks since the video surfaced, not with anger, but with something colder, distance. "Do you want to turn it off?" Kenya asked him softly. He shook his head. "I want to see what she says." And so they watched. "I will be participating in sensitivity training," Carrington went on, "and I will work closely with our district's inclusion board to ensure that our classrooms are safe, respectful environments for every student." Kenya could feel her chest clenching tighter with each word. There was no sincerity, no ownership, just damage control. A message crafted by lawyers, approved by PR, meant to protect her, not repair what she broke. When the speech ended, the superintendent leaned into the microphone. "We commend Miss Carrington for stepping forward, for showing accountability, and for her willingness to grow." That was the moment Kenya stood up. "Accountability?" she whispered, her voice sharp with disbelief. "This ain't growth. This is a performance." She turned to Malcolm, who still hadn't moved. "Baby, are you okay?" He nodded, but his lips were pressed so tightly they'd lost color. His eyes were glassy but dry. He wasn't just watching a teacher, he was watching the world tell him that even when someone hurt you, they could get applause for pretending they didn't. "She didn't say it," he murmured. "Say what?" "She didn't say what she did. She didn't say sorry to me." Kenya knelt beside him, her hand brushing gently through his hair. "That's because this apology wasn't for you. It was for them." He looked at her finally, his eyes piercing. "Then why does everyone think it's enough?" Kenya had no answer. That night, as the video made its rounds across television, social media, and PTA group chats, Kenya sat at the kitchen table long after Malcolm went to bed. The apartment was silent, except for the occasional creak of the old radiator. In her hands was a draft email she had written but never sent to the school board, to the superintendent, to whoever would listen. It was fierce, eloquent, filled with truth, but she never hit send. Until now. With trembling fingers, she attached a photo, Malcolm's drawing of the mug labeled Hope, and sent the message. She stood from the table, paced once, then walked into her son's room. He was awake. His sketchbook was open, and this time he wasn't drawing. He was staring at a blank page, pencil in hand, as though waiting for something to come. "I think it's time," she said quietly. He looked up. "Time for what?" "For you to leave that school. You don't belong in a place that doesn't protect your heart." Malcolm blinked. "Where would I go?" "I don't know yet, but I'll find it. We'll find it. You deserve better than this." He nodded slowly. I don't want them to think they won," he whispered. Kenya knelt again, eye level with him. "They didn't. You're still standing. You're still creating. You're still you. That's the win." For the first time in weeks, a flicker of light returned to Malcolm's eyes. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was recognition that someone still saw him, clearly when so many were trying to erase his pain in the name of optics. The next morning, Kenya began the process of withdrawing Malcolm from Maple Hill. She didn't know yet where he would go, but she refused to let him sit in a place that praised the person who broke him while leaving his name out of the narrative. The school office was cold, sterile, detached. The front desk secretary, eyes wide with a mixture of discomfort and guilt, nodded through the withdrawal form. Kenya signed without speaking. When she returned home, Malcolm was finishing a drawing. It was a simple sketch, a cracked mug held together by gold seams. In the Japanese art of kintsugi, broken pottery is repaired with lacquer mixed with gold, honoring the break instead of hiding it. He didn't know about kintsugi. He just knew the mug still mattered. Kenya stood behind him, hands on his shoulders, looking down. "That's beautiful," she said quietly. "Healing," he murmured. Then came the knock. Sharp, deliberate, unfamiliar. Kenya turned quickly, her brows furrowed. She checked the peephole. A tall man stood on the other side, dressed in a navy blue coat, with a clipboard in one hand. He wasn't from the building, he wasn't from the school, and he wasn't someone she recognized. She opened the door cautiously. "Good morning," he said politely. "Are you Miss Kenya Reaves?" Her voice was wary. "I am. Who's asking?" He smiled gently, nodding toward Malcolm, who now stood behind her. "I'm with Dreamseed Foundation. We saw your son's story." She narrowed her eyes unsure. "What's Dreamseed?" He extended a folder. "We help talented, underrepresented kids in creative fields. We'd like to speak with you about a mentorship opportunity for Malcolm." Malcolm peeked around his mother's side, eyes wide. What kind of opportunity? Kenya asked slowly. The man's answer was quiet, measured. A summer program in New York. Fully sponsored. He'd study under one of the country's leading black illustrators. Kenya's breath caught. So did Malcolm's. But what the man didn't mention was who had submitted Malcolm's name, and why. Kenya stood frozen, her hand still gripping the door handle, as the man, tall, clean-cut, polite, extended the folder like it contained a future too fragile to speak aloud. Behind her, Malcolm clutched the edge of the wall, his body tense with something between curiosity and disbelief. I'm Noah Braxton. The man said again, with a calm, professional tone. Director of Dream Seed Foundation. We focus on creative development for youth who often go overlooked in traditional systems. I believe your son, Malcolm, might be an excellent candidate for one of our summer mentorship residencies. Kenya blinked, processing the name. She hadn't heard of Dream Seed. It sounded made up, like something from a brochure she'd throw out with the junk mail. But the way this man said her son's name, with familiarity, with purpose, made her hesitate. How do you know about my son? She asked cautiously. Noah smiled gently. Your story, Miss Reeves. Or rather, Malcolm's story. It's reached people. Not just the outrage, but his sketches. Someone posted one of his drawings, the cracked mug, and tagged us. We've had over 20 staff members send it to me in the last week. Kenya's heart jumped. Posted it. But I didn't. It was shared by a small art justice blog, Noah explained. Apparently someone scanned one of Malcolm's sketches from a community meeting bulletin. It circulated faster than expected. Honestly, it stopped me in my tracks. He turned to Malcolm, offering his words more directly. You have a rare eye, Malcolm. The way you captured pain and hope in one image. That's not just talent. That's vision. Malcolm stared at him, unsure if he should believe a stranger using words he had only ever heard whispered in private by his mother. Noah continued. We have a summer program in New York City. It's a 6-week intensive mentorship led by professional black artists and illustrators. This year's lead mentor is Tobias Lane. Kenya's eyes widened. Tobias Lane. The animator from Rise and Hollow? Noah nodded. The same. And we'd like Malcolm to be one of this year's fellows. It's all expenses paid. Travel, meals, housing, materials. There's even a stipend. But more importantly, it's a space where kids like Malcolm aren't just welcomed. They're centered. Kenya's mind raced. They'd never been on a plane. They barely covered rent. The idea of Malcolm living in another state, even temporarily, sent a jolt of both fear and awe through her. I'm sorry, she said carefully, but this is a lot. You just showed up at my door. You're saying you want to fly my son out to New York. Noah nodded respectfully. Yes, ma'am. I understand it, it's sudden. But we work fast because opportunities for kids like Malcolm disappear too easily if we wait. I'm happy to leave information, answer every question. But this, he tapped the folder. This is real. He turned to Malcolm. Do you want to see what the world looks like when it values your gift? Because I promise you, it's bigger than this apartment. Bigger than that school. Malcolm's voice was quiet. What if I'm not good enough? Noah's expression didn't change. You already are. Something flickered in Malcolm's face. Doubt. Yes. But also the tiniest glint of something unfamiliar. Possibility. Kenya took the folder from Noah's hand, flipping through it slowly. Real names. Real addresses. Program details. A travel itinerary. Mock-up. It was legitimate. Still, part of her wanted to slam the door, to protect her son from more exposure, more vulnerability. But the other part, the mother who watched her son disappear piece by piece under the weight of shame, knew this might be a way to rebuild him. I'll think about it, she said firmly. Noah nodded. Of course, I'll check back tomorrow. Or sooner, if you need. As he stepped away, he turned back. One more thing. Malcolm, keep drawing. You're already changing things. And then he was gone. The door closed behind him, but the air in the apartment had shifted. Kenya set the folder on the table, not yet ready to read it again. Malcolm sat down in front of it, without a word. You okay? She asked. He nodded, slowly. He knew my name. Kenya exhaled, a mix of fear and pride rising in her throat. Yeah, he did. That night, Malcolm barely touched dinner. He sat with his sketchbook open again, but instead of hesitation, his pencil moved with quiet urgency. He didn't draw the mug this time. He drew a skyline he had never seen. His vision of New York, Tall buildings, light beams, subway trains curving beneath the earth like veins. In the center, a small boy held a pencil like a sword. Kenya watched from the kitchen. She didn't interrupt. She knew this wasn't about logistics now. It was about readiness. The next morning, before the sun fully rose, Malcolm walked into her room holding the folder. "I want to go," he said. She rubbed her eyes. "Are you sure?" He nodded. I think I need to." His voice carried none of the hesitation it used to. There was no tremble, no second guessing. Kenya sat up and reached for the folder. "Then we'll make it happen." Within days, Dreamseed's team moved quickly. A local sponsor offered to cover Malcolm's travel essentials. Tobias Lane himself sent a personalized welcome letter, praising the emotional discipline in Malcolm's sketches. The school issued an official release form. Suddenly, a boy who had been invisible in the background of a classroom was now the focus of national attention. But in a new light. Kenya packed his suitcase slowly. She folded each item with precision, her hands betraying her inner storm. She was proud but terrified. He was only 10. What if something went wrong? What if he got homesick? What if this new world rejected him too? But when she looked at Malcolm, she saw someone she hadn't seen in months. Her son, not diminished but rising. The night before his flight, they sat on the floor together, looking through old sketchbooks. Kenya paused at one page, one of his earliest drawings, a teacher with no face, standing in front of a class. "I remember this one," she said softly. Malcolm nodded. "I was trying to figure out why teachers didn't like me." Her throat tightened. "They didn't see you." "Not really. I think maybe, now someone does." The next morning they arrived at the airport. Another first. Malcolm clutched his backpack tightly, his sketchbook inside, a single drawing taped to the cover, the cracked mug with the gold seams. Kenya knelt to meet his eyes before he stepped toward security. "You remember who you are, okay?" He nodded. "And if anyone makes you feel small, I won't let them," he said. She smiled. "That's right." He hugged her, tighter than ever before, then turned and walked toward the gate. Kenya stood in place long after he disappeared from view. Malcolm's plane lifted into the sky like a chapter closing. But in another part of the city, a different page was being torn apart. While Malcolm soared toward a future written in pencil and possibility, Miss Carrington sat alone in her townhouse, curtains drawn, her laptop glowing with headlines she couldn't stop. Someone had leaked something new. A former student, an archived parent email. Evidence that this wasn't the first time her conduct had been questioned, that her misunderstanding was a pattern. And this time, the district couldn't protect her. Within hours, she was served with a lawsuit, naming Malcolm and Kenya as part of the evidence. By the time Malcolm's flight touched down in New York City, the life he left behind in St. Louis had ignited like dry grass in a wildfire. The soft click of his suitcase wheels over polished terminal floors marked a quiet victory. He was escaped, but while he moved into a space of mentorship and possibility, the woman who had once towered over him with a clipped smile and dismissive tone was watching her carefully constructed world unravel piece by piece. Miss Penelope Carrington sat at her dining table in silence, the soft buzz of her phone breaking through the thick quiet like an unwanted guest. Her inbox was flooding, sponsors pulling out of her educational podcast, collaborators severing ties, and messages from former peers reading more like farewell notes than support. On social media, the narrative had shifted completely. Once praised as a dedicated educator, she now trended as a symbol of racial bias cloaked in professional polish. The most damning headline came from a national education watchdog. History of Harm: How a Fifth-Grade Teacher Became a Flashpoint for Racial Reckoning in Classrooms. Inside the article were testimonies from 3 former students, 2 black, 1 biracial, who described eerily similar experiences, being overlooked, talked down to, or shamed for attitude or tone whenever they challenged her methods. Each story felt like a mirror to what had happened to Malcolm. Penelope read each paragraph with mounting dread, her hands trembling as she realized this wasn't just about the mug anymore. The world had cracked open her entire career, her reputation, her curated identity as a progressive educator. But what she couldn't stomach, what ignited something cold and vengeful inside her, was that all of it had been triggered by a child's dollar store mug, and the word hope written in a sloppy silver marker. To Penelope, it was never about racism. It was about optics, bad timing, and the court of public opinion that had already sentenced her. And in her twisted sense of logic, the real injustice was what had been done to her. So, in a move that blindsided nearly everyone, she fought back, Not with an apology, but with legal retaliation. Within days, her lawyer filed a civil suit for defamation, naming both Kenya Reaves and Malcolm Reaves as defendants. The suit argued that the viral video, the community's response, and the reckless sharing of her name and reputation had caused emotional distress, professional damage, and economic loss. Her claim didn't deny her words. It claimed they had been selectively weaponized. It didn't deny Malcolm's pain. It claimed it had been exaggerated to generate outrage. But what stung most was how the lawsuit used language to flip the narrative. The boy became a symbol used for political gain. The mother became an opportunist who incited community hysteria. When Kenya received the manila envelope on a rainy Thursday morning just 3 days before Malcolm's first formal workshop in New York, she thought it was more paperwork from the mentorship program. But when she opened it and saw the letterhead, Carrington versus Reeves et al., her breath caught. She sat down at the kitchen table, her fingers frozen on the page. The lawsuit detailed Penelope's damages, including lost income, emotional trauma, and reputational harm. The amount sought, $150,000 in damages. For Kenya, who could barely afford rent, the number felt like a cruel joke. Malcolm was still asleep, his suitcase by the door, his sketchbook tucked under his pillow. He had no idea his name was now printed in legal documents that treated him not as a child, but as a threat. Kenya sat in silence for several minutes, staring at the pages, unable to cry, unable to move. This wasn't just an attack on her. It was a direct blow to her son's healing. She wanted to scream. Instead, she picked up her phone and dialed the one person she thought might know what to do. Pastor Rennell Harris, a longtime friend of her late father and a quiet but powerful figure in their community. "Rennell," she whispered when he answered. "She's suing us." He paused. "You talking about that teacher?" "Yes. It's real. Court papers. Everything." A breath. Then, "Bring it to me. We'll figure this out. You're not alone, Kenya." Those words landed like a net beneath a free fall. Later that day, she drove to the small office attached to the church. Rennell read every page carefully, his brows tightening, his jaw set. When he finished, he looked up. "This isn't just about her saving face," he said. "This is about silencing you, and making sure your boy never dares to rise again." Kenya exhaled slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "We don't have money for a lawyer, Rennell. I can't let this hit him right when he's finding himself again." "You won't have to," he said firmly. "I'll make some calls. Pro bono firms, civil rights advocates. This case, if it goes to court, could expose more than she realizes." Kenya's voice cracked. "He's a child. He gave a gift. And now she's turning it into a weapon." Rennell leaned across the desk, his voice steady. "Then it's time we turn the spotlight she hated back on her. Not to destroy her, but to make sure no one like her ever does this again." Back home, Kenya tucked the documents away. She would tell Malcolm, eventually, but not before his mentorship began. He needed space to breathe, to grow. She wouldn't let this woman's bitterness suffocate him all over again. That night, she watched him through his cracked bedroom door. He was on a video call with his new mentor, Tobias Lane, nodding along as the older man gave him notes on composition and layering emotion into facial expressions. Malcolm's smile was small, but real. Kenya wiped her eyes quietly and closed the door. But outside their small apartment, the lawsuit had already ignited a second wave of attention. News outlets picked up the filing. Interviews with civil rights attorneys began circulating. A black-led legal defense fund offered to cover Kenya's legal costs. Activists and educators started asking deeper questions about who gets to define harm and who gets punished for naming it. Penelope Carrington had expected sympathy. She got scrutiny. In her effort to reclaim her dignity, she triggered a deeper investigation. The school board released additional complaints that had been quietly filed by parents over the years. Concerns dismissed, emails ignored. Some revealed she'd penalized students for speaking too boldly, others that she discouraged emotionally charged art from kids she found troubled. What had once been her defense became her downfall. And yet none of that changed the fact that Kenya was now officially entangled in a legal nightmare she hadn't asked for. She stared at the court date notice again. It was scheduled the same week Malcolm was due to return from New York. As she folded the document and tucked it beneath the stack of unpaid bills, she made a decision, one that filled her with equal parts fear and power. She would fight, not just for her son, but for every black child who had ever been told their effort wasn't enough. who had ever been dismissed with a smile that meant stay small. And she wouldn't do it quietly. But just as Kenya began to prepare her defense, a new email arrived, this time from New York, and what it revealed about Malcolm's sketches sent a ripple she never saw coming. Malcolm sat by the window of gate B9, knees tucked under his chin, sketchbook balanced across his lap. The early morning sun filtered through the glass, casting long lines across the terminal floor. Around him, passengers bustled, announcements echoed, and rolling suitcases clattered like distant drumbeats. But inside his mind, the noise dimmed. There was only the weight of the sketchbook, and the flight that would carry him farther than he'd ever imagined. He was leaving St. Louis, leaving the whispers in the hallway, leaving the trash can where his gift had landed, leaving the teacher, who had made him question his worth. The court summons still sat folded in his mother's purse back home. The lawsuit hadn't gone away. But thanks to mounting public pressure, a local civil rights firm had filed a motion to pause legal proceedings until after Malcolm's mentorship ended. It wasn't a win, but it was breathing room. And for now, that was enough. Kenya had walked him all the way to security, hugging him so tightly she left the smell of lavender in the collar of his hoodie. Her words echoed in his ears even as he boarded the plane. Go be more than what they see you as. He hadn't known how to answer, so he just nodded. But inside he felt something unfamiliar swelling in his chest. Not pride exactly, more like momentum. The plane's engine roared to life, and Malcolm's fingers gripped the armrests. It was his first flight. First time seeing clouds from above, not below. First time flying toward something, instead of trying to escape it. The moment the wheels lifted from the runway, he didn't feel fear. He felt light. Dreamseed's headquarters in Manhattan was nothing like he expected. The building sat tucked between two towering office complexes in Harlem. Modern glass on the outside, but warm wood and art-covered walls on the inside. He walked into a space humming with energy. Murals stretched across entire staircases, sketches spilled over tables, music drifted from headphones and studio speakers. Teenagers of all backgrounds filled the rooms, laughing, debating, drawing in furious bursts. But it wasn't chaotic. It was alive. Each student wore a lanyard with their name, and a chosen word below it. Malcolm's vision. He met kids from Brooklyn, Oakland, Baltimore, even one from a reservation in Arizona. Some had private tutors back home. Others, like him, had come from nothing. But here, none of that mattered. The only currency was what you could create. When Tobias Lane walked in on the first day of mentorship, Malcolm froze. The man was taller than he looked online, with locks tied into a low bun and glasses perched on his head like an afterthought. He wore jeans and a hoodie that said "Draw Loud," but his presence was magnetic, quietly powerful, like a storm that hadn't yet spoken. He greeted each student personally, asking not just names but what they felt when they created. When he reached Malcolm, he looked at the sketchbook clutched to the boy's chest and said, "You brought your sword." Malcolm blinked. "It's just my drawings." Tobias tilted his head. "No such thing as just when it comes to truth. You ready to show me?" He nodded, opening the sketchbook with trembling fingers. Tobias turned the pages slowly. A cracked mug. A faceless woman standing before a blackboard. A boy folded into a paper plane flying over a city. When he closed the book, Tobias said simply, "This isn't art school. This is church. These pages, these are sermons." Malcolm didn't speak, but for the first time in months he smiled. Just barely. Each day, the mentorship deepened. Tobias pushed them past technique into emotion. "Don't draw what it looks like," he'd say. "Draw what it felt like when you lived it." They explored pain, joy, rage, silence. No one laughed at tears here. No one asked them to shrink. Malcolm began waking before sunrise to draw. His sketches evolved, less literal, more layered. A boy made of glass walking through fire, a teacher with a mirror for a face, a child holding a mug, so large it cast a shadow over an entire city. Tobias watched him carefully. Quiet encouragement, occasional redirection, but mostly, he let Malcolm's own voice rise. By week 3, Tobias called him into his office, a small room lined with animation cells and charcoal portraits. "Close the door," he said. Malcolm obeyed, nerves spiking. Tobias pointed to a manila folder on his desk. "These came in this morning. I submitted a few of your sketches to a youth gallery committee. Didn't tell you because I didn't want pressure to mess with your process." Malcolm's eyes widened. You submitted my drawings. They picked you, Tobias said. They want to feature your series' Cracked Value in a national student showcase. In DC. Next month. Malcolm's breath caught. Me? You? All of you. He sat in stunned silence. You've been seeing Malcolm, Tobias said, and now they're asking to hear more. Malcolm nodded slowly, voice low. I didn't think people wanted to hear me. Tobias leaned forward. People don't always know they need to, until you speak. Back at the Dreamseed residence hall, Malcolm called his mother. She answered on the first ring. I got picked for a showcase, he said quickly. Kenya gasped. Baby, that's amazing. What kind of showcase? In DC, Tobias said. It's national. She paused, swallowing emotion. You're blowing the lid off what they thought you were. His voice cracked slightly. I miss you. I miss you too. But keep pushing. You're not just showing your gift. You're showing them who you are. He didn't say it, but he needed to hear it. And she knew that. But while Malcolm soared higher, back in Missouri, Miss Carrington was quietly stoking new flames. After the lawsuit's temporary pause, her PR team abandoned her. Her public apology had long faded. The teachers' union had gone silent, distancing themselves. And with the school board now under external review, Carrington was left isolated in a community that once sent her holiday baskets and handwritten notes. Her home became her courtroom. Every wall lined with folders, statements, screenshots. She tracked every post that mentioned Malcolm, every news article. To her, this wasn't about race. It was about her being ruined by a narrative she didn't control. One night, sitting in her dim kitchen, she scrolled through the Dreamseed Foundation's website. There, on the front page, was Malcolm, a photo of him drawing beneath a caption that read, From Shame to Story, How Art Gave a Voice to a Silenced Boy. She stared at it for nearly 10 minutes. Then she opened a new browser tab and began typing a message. Not to the court, not to the school board, to a conservative news blog known for exposing education reform programs and equity-driven nonprofits. She uploaded the Dreamseed photo, attached her side of the story, and clicked send. That night, while Malcolm was still asleep in his dorm, his face appeared on a new site under a new headline. From Student to Political Pawn, How Woke Programs Are Exploiting Children for Agenda. The article included cropped versions of his sketches. No context, no mention of trauma, only accusations that he was being used to attack teachers and promote liberal indoctrination. The damage was subtle, but swift. Within hours, Dreamseed's inbox was hit with threats. Sponsors asked questions, and Malcolm, still unaware, walked into his mentorship class the next morning and noticed the shift. Fewer smiles, whispers. One older student avoided eye contact. Tobias met him at the door, holding a tablet. We need to talk, he said quietly. Malcolm read the headline, and for the first time since leaving St. Louis, he wondered if he'd ever really escaped it. Kenya Reaves had never planned to be a voice. She was a mother, a night shift worker, a woman who paid her rent one utility bill behind. Advocacy had never been on her resume. But when someone threatens your child and then dares to sue you for surviving it, silence is no longer an option. Silence, she realized, had become another word for surrender. Her days blurred. By morning, she was fielding media calls. By night, she was clocking in at the second shift in a care home, where elderly patients pulled her into whispered prayers and nurses nodded at her with cautious admiration. Somewhere in between, she folded laundry, paid bills in partial payments, and read every article that mentioned her son's name. What started as outrage from one community had sparked something bigger, something volatile. Black parents across the district began reaching out. They spoke in low voices on phone calls, at gas stations, in grocery store aisles. My daughter stopped raising her hand in 3rd grade. We thought it was just shyness. My son got suspended for disrespect when he asked why a white kid got a warning. She told my child his tone was aggressive. And he's 10. Each story was different, but the rhythm was the same. Moments dismissed, children labeled, dreams chipped away slowly by the same kind of teacher who smiled for photos and used coded language in discipline reports. And then someone, Kenya never learned who, started a hashtag. It was never just a mug. It caught fire. Within a week, parents were organizing. A local organizer, Rochelle Banks, reached out to Kenya directly. We're holding a town hall, she said. You don't have to lead it. Just show up. Let people see the mother behind the boy. The one they've tried to silence. Kenya hesitated. I'm not a speaker. You don't have to be polished. Just be honest. That's enough. The first time she stood in front of a crowd, Kenya's hands trembled so badly she had to grip the podium. But when she opened her mouth, the words came not from practice, but from memory. My son gave a gift. He thought it meant something. And it did. Just not to the woman who threw it away. The room went still. He wasn't loud. He wasn't bad. He was just black, and quiet, and thoughtful, and that scared her. People leaned in. Phones recorded. Heads nodded. She said it was a misunderstanding. But you don't misunderstand a 10-year-old's hope and throw it in the trash. That line made the local news. After that, Kenya couldn't hide even if she wanted to. Journalists called. Activists quoted her speech. Emails poured in from parents in other states, other school districts, thanking her for naming the quiet violence. But fame, if that's what it was, came with cost. One afternoon she found a flyer slipped under her apartment door, a crude drawing of her with the words, "Race baiter" scrawled across it. She tossed it before Malcolm returned home for break. The legal case loomed in the background, still paused but far from over. Kenya knew that Miss Carrington's team was likely watching every word she said, but she no longer cared. There were too many children watching her now. Too many families waiting for someone to say what they'd all swallowed for years. But the spotlight was a lonely place. At home, Kenya's world shrank to pressure points. Her sleep shortened. Her savings evaporated. Her shifts at the care center became harder to manage with the constant public attention. And through it all, she tried to protect Malcolm, still in New York, still unaware of just how much his story had shifted into something larger than both of them. He called every few nights, always excited, always grateful. He spoke about his art, the showcase, Tobias Lane's feedback, and how he was learning to use color to communicate emotion. But never once did he mention the headlines, or the lawsuit, or the weight that now pressed against his mother's shoulders. Because she hadn't told him. She didn't want to dim his light with her struggle. But the cracks were starting to show. One night after another town hall, Kenya sat in her car in a dim parking lot, staring at her hands. They were shaking again, not from fear this time, but exhaustion. It had all begun with a mug, and now her life had been turned upside down. She rested her head against the steering wheel. Then her phone buzzed. It was an email. Subject: donation confirmation. Reeves Education Trust. Her eyes widened. She opened it, expecting spam. Instead, it was a verified communication from a local community foundation, confirming receipt of a $25,000 donation, made in honor of Malcolm Reaves' artistic contribution to racial equity in education. Attached was a signed document showing the funds had been earmarked for legal support, community events, and art-based racial healing projects in the district. The donor, anonymous. Kenya stared at the screen. She read the line again. In honor of Malcolm Reaves. Her throat tightened. She looked around, as if someone might jump out and explain the moment. But she was alone in the car, surrounded by dark silence and distant headlights. A donation. A tribute. A message. She called Rochelle. Did you know about this? No, Rochelle replied. But that's not all. Check your social media. Look up Shoe Hope Fund. Kenya hung up and searched. What she found made her hand fly to her mouth. Dozens of creators had launched a viral fundraiser, using Malcolm's story and his artwork as a symbol of reclamation. Teachers, artists, even celebrities had reposted the drawings with the caption, "This is what hope looks like." The fund had already passed 50. Kenya's eyes filled with tears. She hadn't known were waiting. Malcolm's art was no longer just personal. It was powerful. And then another message arrived. This time, from Dreamseed Foundation. A formal letter, requesting permission to adapt Malcolm's Cracked Value series into a limited-run children's book, illustrated by him, published by a partner press, with all proceeds split between his future college fund and a new initiative to support Black student artists. Kenya sat back against the seat. Her son, the quiet one, the one mocked for a $5 mug, the one who stopped speaking because he thought the world didn't want to hear him. He had become a vessel for something much larger. But Kenya couldn't enjoy the moment fully. Because the money came with risk. Visibility came with target marks. And Miss Carrington wasn't done. That same night, while Kenya was still processing the donation, a reporter forwarded her a leaked email from Miss Carrington's lawyer, hinting at a countersuit for financial exploitation of a minor's trauma. Miss Penelope Carrington's world had shrunk to 2 rooms and a screen. Her once lavish townhouse sat hollow and quiet, the sound of her own footsteps echoing through space. she could no longer afford to fill. Her speaking engagements had disappeared. Her teacher podcast, once modestly successful, had lost all its sponsors. Even casual acquaintances had grown scarce, their polite distance now replaced by public silence. Still, she checked the mail every day. It had become a ritual, a quiet rebellion against the void. One envelope at a time, she hoped for something that would change the narrative. A letter of apology from the school board, a retraction from a news outlet, a job offer, anything to confirm that she hadn't been fully erased. But that afternoon, what waited in her mailbox was something she couldn't have imagined. The envelope was heavy, official-looking, stamped with the seal of Maple Hill Elementary, a place she hadn't set foot in since her resignation. She opened it slowly, her fingers trembling, mind racing through possible explanations. A settlement offer? A final reprimand? But inside was something far more jarring, a donor acknowledgement form. At the top of the letterhead, bold and impossible to miss, were the words, "Confirmation of restricted donation allocation, $100,000, anonymous gift." She blinked, rereading it, expecting her eyes to correct themselves. But the words were unchanged. She kept reading. Designated specifically for anti-racism education reform and the development of a new K-5 arts enrichment initiative. All to be created and implemented in the name of Malcolm Reaves. Her hands went cold. She stared at the name, printed in bold font, like a plaque on a monument. Malcolm Reaves. The boy who had given her a hand-drawn mug. The boy whose silence she had mistaken for weakness. The boy whose name now carried a donation, large enough to reshape the entire foundation of the very place she had once ruled with unquestioned authority. It wasn't just the money, it was the message. She sat down on the edge of her couch, letter in hand, heart pounding. Someone had donated $100,000. Not in her defense, not in memory of her career, but in honor of the student she had humiliated. She read the letter again. There was no clue to the donor's identity, just the language of reform, equity, healing, phrases that now stung like accusation. Her mind cycled through possibilities. Could it be one of the celebrity supporters who had reposted his artwork? A wealthy patron moved by the story? Maybe the nonprofit behind Dreamseed? But something about the way it was directed, specifically at her former school, and in his name, felt more pointed, more personal. She couldn't let it go. She called the school's administrative office, under the pretense of needing to confirm the mailing address had been correct. The assistant on the line sounded uneasy, clearly unsure if she should be speaking to Carrington at all. Before she could hang up, Penelope pushed. "This donation, can you tell me who made it?" "I'm sorry, it was anonymous," the assistant replied quickly. "But you must have contact information. For tax receipts. Legal tracking." The woman hesitated. "I really can't share that." Penelope's voice dropped into a lower register, the kind she used to command respect in the classroom. "I'm not asking you to give me their social security number. I just want to know if it was someone connected to the school." The silence on the other end lasted a beat too long. "I really shouldn't say, please." A breath. Then, "All I can say is, it's someone who knew you, personally." Penelope's breath hitched. "Knew me how?" But the call went dead. She sat frozen. Knew her? Her mind raced back through names. Former students, parents, no. None of them had that kind of money. Teachers? No. Then she remembered a name she hadn't thought of in over a decade. Vanessa Gordon. Her old college roommate. A black woman. Bright. Brilliant. Always the top of every class. Vanessa had been the one person Penelope couldn't quite outshine. They'd shared a dorm, but never truly connected. Penelope had admired her, but resented her too. Vanessa had this way of taking up space without apology, while Penelope had learned to use charm and poise to keep control. There had been an incident in their senior year. A debate competition. Penelope had challenged Vanessa's statement about systemic bias in academia, claiming it was overstated and divisive. She'd used her usual polished tone, but Vanessa had called her out in front of everyone. "You don't get to tone police the truth," she had said. The room had gone quiet. Penelope never forgot it. After graduation, they lost touch. Vanessa went on to law school, then launched a philanthropic foundation focused on racial justice and education. Penelope had seen her name once or twice in news articles, but had never paid much attention. Until now. It had to be her. Penelope opened her laptop and searched. Within seconds she found a recent press release. The Gordon Initiative announces increased funding to support underrepresented youth in the Midwest. Buried in the article, one line stood out. We believe in transformative justice, not through punishment, but by investing in those harmed. She didn't need a signature to know. This wasn't charity. This was a statement. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. It read, "It's not about you anymore." It never was. Penelope dropped the phone. The message wasn't cruel. It wasn't gloating. It was simply final. She stood in her living room, staring at the donation letter in one hand and the text in the other, understanding for the first time that no apology, no lawsuit, no spin could change what had taken place. The world had already moved on. Malcolm's name now lived in a place of reform, and hers belonged in a cautionary tale. But across town, in a modest apartment with peeling paint and flickering lights, Kenya sat beside her laptop, her mouth slightly open. She had just received the same notice. Her name wasn't on the donation, but her son's was. Her heart pounded as she read the words again. Arts Enrichment Initiative, dedicated to the legacy of Malcolm Reaves. She reached for her phone to call him, but paused. Should she tell him? Would he understand what it meant? Before she could decide, another message landed in her inbox. This one wasn't from the foundation. It was from a literary agent in New York. The subject line, "Let's talk about Malcolm's book." Her hand covered her mouth. She opened it. The email was short but clear. "We've seen the sketches. We've read the backstory. We believe there is a powerful illustrated novel here, guided by Malcolm's voice and vision. We'd like to discuss a publishing deal. A real one." Kenya didn't move. The walls around her seemed to bend inward. Her child had gone from a trash can humiliation to a $100,000 legacy, and a book offer, before he had even finished the 5th grade. She whispered to herself, "You're gonna change this world, baby." Then her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call, from a New York area code. She answered, expecting the agent. But the voice on the other end said something that made her sit up straight. "Ms. Reeves, this is Thomas Lane with Dreamseed. We need to speak with you about Malcolm. Immediate." Her throat tightened. "Is he okay?" There was a pause. Then, "We had an incident today. Something from the press. He saw it. He's not talking to anyone." Kenya stood up, heart racing. "I'm on my way. Put him on the phone now." But when they tried to hand Malcolm the phone, he refused to take it, and instead walked out of the building without telling anyone where he was going. The weight of the letter still lay heavy on Penelope Carrington's kitchen counter, but her thoughts were 1,000 miles away, trapped in a dorm room at Westridge University, nearly 20 years earlier. She remembered the carpeted floor with the faint smell of ramen, the corkboard wall where quotes were pinned like sacred commandments, the 2 twin beds separated by more silence than closeness, and she remembered Vanessa Gordon. Back then, Penelope had considered her tolerable. That was the word she used in her mind when trying to justify the prickling discomfort. Vanessa's confidence stirred in her. Vanessa didn't tone herself down. She didn't apologize before speaking. She didn't dilute her anger to make others comfortable. For Penelope, raised on the etiquette of white professionalism, Vanessa was a challenge, not for her intellect, which Penelope privately admired, but because Vanessa never pretended to be less than what she was. The moment that had broken them, though they were never truly whole, came during their junior year debate seminar. The topic, "Is systemic racism exaggerated in modern academic institutions?" Penelope had taken the opposing stance, not because she believed it entirely, but because she thought it was a compelling argument to sharpen her rhetoric. She'd opened her speech with a smug tone. "We must avoid conflating isolated experiences with systemic bias. Not every uncomfortable moment is discrimination." Vanessa's rebuttal didn't raise its voice. She simply said, "That's easy to say when none of those uncomfortable moments have ever been yours." Then she turned to the room and added, "It's always the most polite racism that does the deepest damage." There had been silence. Penelope had laughed awkwardly, trying to deflect, but Vanessa's eyes didn't move. She wasn't debating a point. She was naming a wound. They never spoke again after that semester. They graduated, went their separate ways. Penelope stayed in the system, teaching, climbing, becoming. Vanessa left it entirely, choosing instead to build power outside its walls. She'd gone into law but quickly shifted into nonprofit work. Her foundation grew quickly, partnering with education initiatives and investing in youth leadership programs. She became a quiet but undeniable force, appearing on lists of top Black philanthropists under 40, often described as disruptive with grace. Penelope had watched from afar with a mix of disdain and jealousy. Vanessa made it all look too easy, like success didn't require shape-shifting. But now, the past had folded itself into the present. The $100,000 donation hadn't just been about Malcolm. It had been about her. A mirror held up to the moment Penelope thought the world had forgotten. And then came the message. Short, cold, clear. It's not about you anymore. It never was. Penelope stared at it for hours before deleting it. But the words stayed. The next day, another letter arrived. Handwritten. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of expensive ivory-colored stationery. The penmanship was unmistakable. Looped, elegant, assertive. Penelope, you taught me something once. Not in the way you intended, but in a way that shaped me. You taught me what it means to be dismissed while smiling, to be erased without slurs. I never forgot it. Because it made me promise myself that I would never let someone like you be the last voice a child heard when they questioned their worth. Malcolm doesn't know me. He doesn't need to. But I saw him. I saw the moment you tried to reduce him to nothing. And I made a decision, not to punish you, but to prove that no matter how much you try to contain someone's value, some of us were born to outgrow your labels. This isn't about revenge. This is about reckoning. There's more coming. I suggest you pay attention. Vanessa. Penelope folded the letter slowly, her pulse hammering in her throat. There's more coming. She didn't know what that meant, but it shook her. And it should have. Across the city, Vanessa stood inside her office, a minimalist space lined with portraits of children from past programs she'd sponsored. Her assistant, Mariah, entered holding a press folder. It's ready. The press release for the Arts Fellowship. Vanessa nodded. Send it out first thing Monday. Mariah hesitated. Are we revealing the endowment's name? Vanessa smiled. Yes. The next morning, headlines broke on every major education platform. The Reaves Fellowship, $500 K Art Fund, launched to uplift Black youth silenced in schools. The article detailed a 5-year initiative to support young Black artists, whose voices had been dismissed or punished in traditional educational settings. The program would fund school art programs, provide scholarships, and create national art showcases, starting with Malcolm Reaves' Cracked Value series. And at the very bottom of the announcement, just above the contact information, was a line that shifted the ground beneath Penelope Carrington's feet. This program is dedicated to every child who was told their hope wasn't enough. Penelope slammed the laptop shut, but it was too late. Her phone buzzed with notifications. Former colleagues texted her in awkward silence. Old students emailed passive-aggressive commentary cloaked in thoughts and prayers. Parents who had once trusted her with their children now saw her as a symbol of a system too long protected. She tried to craft a rebuttal, a blog post, something to reframe her side, but nothing came. Because deep down she knew this wasn't about whether she meant to hurt Malcolm. It was about the fact that she did. And now her legacy would be permanently tied to his rise. Vanessa, meanwhile, didn't bask in it. She didn't call press conferences or grant interviews. She simply watched the ripples spread. But she wasn't done. Because Malcolm hadn't seen the worst of it yet. A week after the fellowship announcement, Vanessa received an alert from one of her team's monitoring systems. An alt-right blog had released another article, attempting to discredit Malcolm's story. It claimed his rise was manufactured, that his art was ghost-drawn, that his mother was milking trauma for profit. They published photos of Malcolm's apartment building, the front door, the mailbox. They doxed a 10-year-old. Vanessa read the article in stunned silence. Then she picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. A woman answered. Her voice sharp, efficient. Winter's legal! Naomi? It's Vanessa. I need you to file for an emergency protective order. Today? What's going on? They're coming after the boy. I want everything locked down. His school, his housing, his name. No more exposure. We protect him. Naomi exhaled. On it. Vanessa hung up and leaned against her desk. She had tried to do this quietly. She had tried to let hope speak for itself. But it was clear now, hope alone wasn't enough. Malcolm's gift had become a battlefield, and the war wasn't just about what he created. It was about whether the world would let a Black boy rise, without tearing him apart. Back in St. Louis, Penelope Carrington stood before her bedroom mirror, the letter from Vanessa still in her hand. She looked at her own face, so composed for years, so calculated, and saw something she hadn't faced before: fear. Because this time, her undoing wasn't coming from a scandal. It was coming from the very child she'd tried to forget. and the woman who'd been watching her long before the cameras ever arrived. That evening, as Penelope opened her inbox to another wave of criticism, one message stood out: an invitation to speak on a televised panel. Seated directly across from Vanessa Gore, the gallery sat on the edge of Chelsea's art district, polished floors, exposed brick and walls that had once held works from the nation's most renowned painters. That evening, however, every spotlight, every lens, every murmured anticipation belonged to one child, not a prodigy in the traditional sense, not groomed for galleries since toddlerhood, just a boy who had once sat in a fifth-grade classroom and watched the word hope be tossed into a trash bin. Now his hope hung on walls. Malcolm Reaves stood in a simple black shirt and navy slacks, his sketchbook in one hand, his eyes scanning the crowd that buzzed with journalists, critics, students, and strangers from every corner of the country. Cameras flashed, interviewers whispered his name into microphones, curators adjusted their glasses, peering closely at the work of a 10-year-old who had managed to speak louder through pencil strokes than most did with speeches. The exhibition was titled Value. The first portrait showed a young Latina girl holding a lunch tray, with only an apple and a carton of milk, her eyes filled with shame. Another piece depicted a black boy holding a library book, its pages ripped out, his fingers still clutching it like scripture. A third showed a Muslim student holding a hijab stitched from newspaper clippings. Every subject faced the viewer directly, eyes unflinching, objects clutched like proof of identity. But the centerpiece, the one that made people stop in their tracks, whisper, gasp, and in some cases cry, was hung in the gallery's center. It was the mug. The original drawing of the Hope mug from his classroom was re-rendered in full scale, surrounded by fractured frames. Around it were the cracked voices of memory, handwritten phrases etched into the matting. She said it wasn't enough. Maybe next year try something more appropriate. It's just a mug. Each phrase hovered like ghosts in the background, while the mug sat whole in the center, glowing with soft golden highlights. Underneath, in quiet print, the title read, Hell-Bent Throne. The audience didn't need context. The story had already made its rounds online, but here, standing beneath bright gallery lights, it felt sacred. Malcolm didn't speak much that night. He nodded when people approached him. He offered small, polite smiles, but his silence wasn't shyness. It was sovereignty. In this space, he didn't owe anyone an explanation. A reporter from NPR leaned over to Tobias Lane, who stood nearby, beaming with pride. How does a child produce this level of emotional clarity? Tobias shook his head. Because he was made to grow up in a system that doesn't believe it owes him softness. This is what resilience looks like when it draws instead of screams. The showcase trended across every platform within hours. Celebrities reposted photos with captions like, "Protect this voice." One actor even offered to purchase the Hope mug piece for 6 figures, but Malcolm declined. "I don't want it bought," he told Tobias quietly. "I want it remembered." Art critics published glowing reviews. One headline read, "At just 10 years old, Malcolm Reaves rewrites the language of pain." Another said, "His silence is louder than their excuses." But what truly shifted the national conversation was not the praise, it was the truth, that his story wasn't rare. Schools across the country began reviewing their disciplinary records, calling in equity consultants, asking teachers to reflect, not out of guilt, but accountability. A movement emerged among young Black artists, each sharing stories of times they'd been told their work was too political, too angry, or not age-appropriate. And Malcolm became a symbol, not of tragedy, of truth. That night, a major network hosted a live stream segment from the gallery, inviting Malcolm to participate in a brief Q&A. He sat on a stool, camera lights trained on him, a soft microphone clipped to his collar. Tobias stood off camera, giving him a reassuring nod. The host, a well-spoken woman with decades in journalism, leaned in gently. "You've inspired a nation, Malcolm. Your drawings have opened hearts, sparked change. You've turned something painful into something powerful. I only have one more question for you, and you don't have to answer if you're not ready." Malcolm looked at her, his hands clasped in his lap. She continued, "If Miss Carrington were standing in this gallery tonight, looking at your work, and listening to everything this exhibit says, what would you say to her?" The room went still. Even those watching through screens held their breath. Malcolm didn't answer immediately. He looked down, then back at the mug piece on the wall. He spoke softly. "I wouldn't say anything to her." The host blinked, surprised, Nothing? Malcolm shook his head. Because this wasn't for her. He looked at the camera now. This was for every kid who thought they were the problem, who got laughed at, who stayed quiet even when their hearts were loud. He paused. I used to think if I could make her understand, I'd feel better, but now I know she was never supposed to understand. A ripple moved through the room. Pain, pride, grief, release. He finished. She tried to throw away what I gave her, but she didn't know I had more. The host swallowed, clearly moved. Thank you, Malcolm. The audience erupted into quiet applause. That night, as the gallery lights dimmed and guests filtered out, Tobias walked beside Malcolm down the long hallway toward the exit. You handled that like a king, Tobias said. Malcolm smiled faintly. I didn't feel like one. Kings don't always wear crowns, Tobias said. Sometimes they carry scars. Malcolm nodded slowly. Then he said, I don't want to go back to normal. Not the old kind of normal. Tobias put a hand on his shoulder. You won't. You've changed the definition now. Outside, the street buzzed with energy. New York hummed beneath them like a heartbeat. And yet, even with all the lights and sound, Malcolm felt quiet again. But not like before. Not invisible. Just whole. Kenya called minutes later, her voice breathless. I saw the interview. Baby, you were incredible. Malcolm sat on the hotel bed, still wearing his gallery badge. I didn't know what I was going to say, he admitted. Well, she said, you said exactly what needed to be said. There was a pause. Then she added, when you come home, we'll talk. There's more happening. Malcolm's voice was steady. Is it about the donation? Kenya froze. How'd you know? I saw the headline, he said. I know someone gave money to the school. In my name. Yeah, Kenya whispered. But baby, there's more. Malcolm leaned back against the pillows. What kind of more? Kenya hesitated. Someone from her past. A woman named Vanessa. She's doing things in your honor. Big things. She's protecting you in ways I can't explain yet. Malcolm didn't speak right away. Then he said, I don't know her, but I think she knows me. Kenya exhaled. And then her phone buzzed again. It was Tobias. Put it on speaker, Malcolm said. Tobias's voice was urgent. Kenya, Malcolm, I just got a call. Network wants a follow-up segment. Kenya blinked. Tonight? No, Tobias said. Next week. Lev. Malcolm frowned. Why? Because they're doing something bold. Tobias replied. They're inviting both sides. Kenya's stomach turned. What do you mean? The panel, Tobias said. You, Malcolm, and Miss Carrington. And as Malcolm stared at the phone in silence, Kenya could already feel the room spinning, because she knew the world wasn't finished testing her son's voice. The panel had aired 3 nights ago, and people were still talking. Clips from the broadcast had been viewed over 10 million times online. It had been Malcolm's first time on national television in a live setting, seated next to Kenya and directly across from Miss Penelope Carrington. The producers had promised fairness, but there was no such thing when a child shared space with the adult who once humiliated him. Malcolm had sat quietly through most of it, legs swinging slightly under the chair, his sketchbook resting in his lap. The moderators took care not to frame the conversation as a debate. Instead, they called it a national reckoning, a space to explore harm, healing, and hope. Miss Carrington, in a crisp navy blouse and tight-lipped demeanor, offered what many considered her most human moment yet. She spoke of her blind spots, her internalized perceptions, and the damage her words had caused. She even addressed Malcolm directly, though her gaze faltered when their eyes met. I'm sorry, she'd said, for not seeing you, for not understanding the weight of that moment. The room fell silent. Cameras panned to Malcolm. The moderator turned to him gently. Malcolm, would you like to respond? He hadn't rehearsed an answer, but he didn't need to. I hope she learns what real value means, he said slowly, not just in a classroom or from a textbook, but from watching the kids she thought were small become bigger than her imagination ever allowed. He paused. But I'm not angry anymore. That would make me small. And I don't want to be small. The audience, both in studio and watching at home, felt the gravity of his words settle like dust in sunlight. It wasn't a soundbite. It was a shift. The clip went viral. News anchors called it the moment of the decade. Educators across the country hosted classroom discussions around it. Some praised Malcolm's poise, others questioned why a 10-year-old needed to be that mature in the first place. But after the lights dimmed, after the applause faded, and after the Uber ride back to the hotel, Malcolm sat in silence on his bed, staring at his hands. He wasn't angry. But he wasn't okay either. The next day, when Kenya asked how he felt, he simply said, tired. He didn't mean sleepy. He meant soul tired. Because public forgiveness, while praised, celebrated, retweeted, wasn't the same as healing. Healing, he was learning, was quiet, private, and not linear. Some nights he still dreamt of the classroom, the sound of the mug hitting the bottom of the trash can, the half-laughs of his classmates, the twist in his chest when his teacher looked at him not with hate, but with something worse, disappointment, like he'd failed her by being who he was. Other nights he sketched furiously, filling entire pages with abstract lines that felt more like screams than statements. Tobias noticed the change in his style, more erratic, more fragmented, but said nothing. He knew the process had to be honored, not rushed. One evening, Malcolm sat in the library corner of Dreamseed's artist lounge. A warm reading lamp lit the page as he added shading to a drawing titled "The Room Went Quiet." It showed a faceless teacher standing at the center of a circle of desks, each one occupied by a child with a missing mouth. Tobias approached and sat beside him. "You know," he said quietly, "forgiveness ain't for the person who hurt you. It's for you, so you don't carry their poison in your body." Malcolm nodded. "I think I get that. But it doesn't mean you have to forget," Tobias added, "or invite them into your peace." "I don't hate her," Malcolm said, "but I don't want her in my head anymore." Tobias leaned back. "Then that's your boundary, and you get to keep it." But boundaries were hard to hold when the world wanted a tidy ending. When talk shows and online pundits asked whether forgiveness had been achieved, Kenya bristled. She knew what they wanted: a ribbon wrapped around a story, closure, something to make people feel good about moving on. But Malcolm's eyes still shifted in crowded rooms. He still flinched when a voice sounded too much like hers. Healing, Kenya reminded herself, wasn't performative, and her job wasn't to guide Malcolm toward forgiveness. It was to protect his right to move at his own pace. Then the letter arrived. It came in a plain envelope, no return address, handwritten. Tobias found it in the Dreamseed mail pile and handed it to Malcolm with a curious look. "Don't have to open it if you don't want," he said. Malcolm turned it over in his hands. There was no mistaking the handwriting. It was hers. He took it to his room, shut the door, sat at his desk. For a long time he just stared at it. Then, with deliberate slowness, he peeled the flap open. Inside was a single page, no greeting, no signature, just words. "I was raised to think that kindness was something you gave to people who deserved it, but you gave it to me without knowing if I did, and I threw it away. Literally. I don't have an excuse. I only have what I saw in your eyes, the moment it hit the trash can. And I've never stopped seeing them since. You don't owe me forgiveness, or anything. But I hope you keep drawing, keep creating, keep showing the world what I failed to see. Because you are valuable. Even if I couldn't hold that truth." That was it. No name. No "I'm sorry" in the traditional sense. Just recognition. Malcolm folded the letter slowly. Then he opened his sketchbook. He didn't draw her. He drew himself small, sitting at a desk. And behind him, not a teacher but a shadow with no face, hands outstretched, trying to grasp something that had already flown too far to catch. Below it he wrote the words, "I'm already gone." That night he didn't tell Kenya about the letter. Not because he was hiding, but because he knew something had shifted. She asked gently, "You okay?" He nodded. "I'm getting there." She smiled. "That's enough for today." And it was. The next morning, the news was already spinning another headline. But Malcolm didn't check his mentions. He went to the studio, sharpened a pencil, and began working on his next piece. This one had no title. Not yet. Just a blank page. And an idea. But just as his pencil touched the paper, his phone buzzed with a message from Tobias. "You need to see this." Malcolm frowned. He opened the link. And there it was. A photo of the original Hope mug. Shattered, held together by gold seams, and sitting in a museum, under glass, with a new plaque beneath it, on loan from the Reeves collection. His heart skipped. But that wasn't the twist. The twist was the museum's location. St. Louis. And in bold print below the image were 5 words. Malcolm never expected to read again. Curated by Penelope Carrington. Exhibit director. The envelope was cream-colored, with no return address, but Malcolm recognized the handwriting before he even opened it. It had been weeks since the panel, and the air had mostly gone quiet again, at least on the surface. Media attention had shifted to new headlines. Dream Seed's tour continued. His artwork had been accepted into 2 national youth exhibitions. On paper, Malcolm Reaves was thriving. But under the surface, where the flash of cameras couldn't reach, the story still pulsed. That morning, Tobias had handed Malcolm the envelope with a curious glance. "She sent another one," he said, voice cautious. Malcolm took it without a word and disappeared into the quiet corner of the Dream Seed loft. The letter was 5 pages long, handwritten, neat, but not rehearsed, raw, in a way Penelope Carrington had never been before. "Dear Malcolm, there are words I've avoided most of my life. One of them is racism. I didn't grow up using it. In my house, that word was reserved for the Klan or bad people on the news, but never for people like us, people who were educated, polite, good. But now I know better. Racism isn't always about slurs or burning crosses. Sometimes it's in the way we teach, the way we dismiss, the way we look at someone and only see what makes us uncomfortable. And I saw you as discomfort, not because you did anything wrong, but because your presence forced me to confront something I didn't want to admit about myself. When you handed me that mug, I didn't just see a gift, I saw a reflection, and I hated it. You reminded me of a childhood I've spent decades trying to bury." Malcolm paused. His fingers tightened around the page. He read on. "I grew up in rural Illinois. My father was a respected man in town, a dentist, a deacon, a man who spoke often about doing right. But he also said things I didn't understand until much later. He told me to cross the street when certain boys walked by. He warned me about getting too close to trouble. And when I brought home my first friend from school, a black girl named Janice, he smiled, but that smile didn't reach his eyes. He told me later, gently but firmly, that Janice's world would never be mine. That we could be kind, but not blind." That phrase stayed with me. Kind, but not blind. I thought it meant being polite while staying protected. I see now it meant keeping distance while pretending we didn't. Malcolm felt a deep cold spread in his chest. The way she described her father, polished, moral, subtly cruel, was more terrifying than open hatred. It reminded him of how racism mutated inside systems too polite to call it by name. When I became a teacher, I thought I was going to change the world. I told myself I was different, that I cared. But caring without unlearning is just performance. And when I saw that mug, wrapped in that crumpled paper, with the word hope written in shaky silver ink, I felt ashamed. Not of you. Of me. Of the way it reminded me of Janice's gift. 20 years earlier. A gift my father mocked after she left. I never said anything. I just laughed with him. I never saw her again. I did the same to you, in a different form. And it broke something in me. Malcolm looked away, blinking fast. He hadn't expected this. He didn't know what he expected. But this wasn't it. Not this level of self-dissection. Not this quiet horror. Watching your art showcase on television was the first time I've cried in years. Not out of guilt. Guilt is selfish. I cried out of shame, because I saw how small I'd tried to make you, and I saw how enormous you had become. And I realized your talent didn't rise in spite of me. It rose because you carried weight I put on you. And that's something I will never forgive myself for. That line sat heavy on the page. That's something I will never forgive myself for.
Not please forgive me.
Not I hope you understand. She wasn't asking. She was exposing. The final page shook in Malcolm's hand as he turned it. "I don't expect a response. I don't even deserve one. But I needed you to know this. I see you now. I see what I refused to. I see what my silence stole. I see what my words tried to crush. And I see the space you've built. Despite it all, I will never again mistake discomfort for danger. I will never again confuse politeness with justice. And I will never again pretend that harm has to be loud, to be real. You taught me that." Penelope. Malcolm sat back against the wall. His eyes blurred. He wasn't sure what to feel. The letter wasn't redemption. It didn't erase the past. But it was something else deeper than regret. It was recognition from someone who had built walls her whole life, and now for the first time stood in front of them with her hands up. He thought of Janice, the girl from Penelope's memory, forgotten by a teacher who should have done more. And now, decades later, the silence had caught up. He didn't speak of the letter to Tobias. Not yet. He didn't bring it up to Kenya either. Some things had to be carried first before they could be shared. That night, he sat at his desk in the studio and pulled out his sketch pad. Then, instead of drawing, he wrote, "Dear Penelope, I'm not angry anymore. But I'm not offering you peace either. Peace is something you earn when the work is done. I think you've only just started. You said I showed you who you are. But the truth is, you showed me something too. Who I never want to become. I will never mistake silence for safety. I will never use power to shrink someone smaller. And I will never throw away what I don't understand. So thank you. Not for what you did, but for what it made me build. This isn't forgiveness. It's truth. I hope you keep learning how to sit in it." He folded the letter carefully. Then he reached into his travel bag and pulled out the same wrapping paper. The one he had saved from that $5 mug. He wrapped the letter in it gently. Then took a black marker and wrote one word across the front. Value. The next morning he placed it in an envelope and addressed it to his old school. He left it with the office secretary during a scheduled visit before Dreamseed's youth lecture. But he didn't add a return address, and he didn't send it through the mail. Because some letters aren't meant to be replied to. Some are just meant to land where the silence began. He walked out without looking back. And as he stepped into the sunlight, the clouds above St. Louis broke open ever so slightly. The next chapter was waiting. But he hadn't turned the page yet. And just as Malcolm stepped into his cab, his phone rang, an unknown number flashing on screen. He picked it up. A voice said, "Malcolm Reaves, this is Netflix. We don't want to make a show about your story. We want you to tell it." In the quiet dawn of New York City, when the streets still held the hush of yesterday's dreams, Malcolm Reaves sat alone on the balcony of the Dreamseed residence. His sketchbook lay open on the small metal table. Early morning light filtered through the tall buildings and painted his page in soft gold. But he didn't draw. Instead, he pressed his lips together and folded a piece of ivory stationery, the same kind of writing paper Penelope Carrington had used in her letter. He had kept her note, unread at first, then read multiple times, then set aside, and today he wrote his own response, not because he expected it to be sent, but because he needed it to leave the space inside him a little clearer. His pen moved slowly, each word weighted. He wrote, "Thank you for showing me who I never wanted to become." He paused. The line haunted him. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't vindictive. It was recognition. Recognition of pain transformed into purpose. He thought of the mug, the trash can, the smirks, the silence, the museum exhibit, everything that had tried to minimize him. He wrote again, "I carry the mug now not as a symbol of humiliation, but as proof of survival. Thank you for making me see that value is not in what you give, but in what you become after the world tries to take it away." He folded the letter carefully, making crisp lines, creating a small rectangle of resolve. The city stirred below him, and he felt the tremor of possibilities. He wondered what his mother would think. Kenya would be proud, but worried too. He imagined her sitting in her modest apartment in Louis, bills stacked, speeches behind her, yet still the strongest person he knew. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Then he placed the letter inside the same wrapping paper from the $5 gift he had once given Miss Carrington. The paper was worn, its corners frayed, the Sharpie scribble of hope still visible. He smoothed it over the letter like a protective layer, and he left it at the school office. He imagined her desk, the smell of chalk dust, the laughter of other children, and the tape dispenser in the corner. He stepped out during a supervised trip to St. Louis with Dreamseed's regional tour, placed the package on her old teacher's desk, now empty and cleaned, and pinned a single word onto the envelope, value. He didn't wait for anyone. He walked out of the building with his head high. He didn't need to watch her face. He didn't need her to open it. He just needed for the letter to rest where it belonged. Back in New York, the showcase halls were still buzzing. The murmur of Malcolm's art trailed him like an echo, every time he entered a classroom, every time he walked through the hallways. But this morning felt different, less like a climb, more like a release. He knew forgiveness wasn't his goal. He didn't want forgiveness. He didn't want her to feel better. He wanted something quieter, closure on his own terms. That silence inside him was shifting. He had changed spaces now. Studio lofts, critique sessions, gallery receptions, but his battle had begun in a fifth-grade classroom. He carried that truth like a marker. Tobias Lane found him finishing breakfast. "Morning, Malcolm. Ready to draw?" he asked. Malcolm nodded. "Yes." Tobias looked at his sketchbook. "You changed the paper." Malcolm glanced down. "Yeah. It's an old piece I carried. Feels important." He didn't explain. But Tobias sensed the weight. He said nothing more. They went into the studio. A day's assignment. Each student to create a piece capturing a moment where they felt invisible, and then represent how they emerged. Malcolm prepared his materials: charcoal, ink wash, gold leaf. He thought of the mug again, how gold seams could repair what was broken. He thought of Penelope's face as she read his apology, not caring enough to wear shame, but forced by the spotlight. He thought of Vanessa, sending money like thunder in the night, the mother fighting in two places at once. He thought of Kenya, working nights so he could draw days. The piece he produced that afternoon was different. No children holding objects, no mugs. It was him, a boy standing in the center of a storm. The wind blew away pieces of his past, sketchbooks, whispers, broken desks, and behind him, light pressed in. Beneath the image, he wrote one word: year. Tobias glanced at it, nodded slowly. "This is honest," he said. "This is your story." In St. Louis, Penelope Carrington sat at her kitchen table again, the letter still on the counter. She had read it slowly, each line a mirror she had avoided. The donation, the fellowship, the headline, the panel, all of it battered her ego. But this letter bruised her heart badly. She picked up the wrapping paper he had used. A printed image of a mug and the word hope. The irony wasn't lost on her. She touched the Sharpie letters lightly, as though trying to trace the moment backwards. She opened her laptop and typed a single line. "How many chances does one teacher get?" No answer. Only the gentle tick of the clock. Penelope looked up as her phone buzzed. She ignored it. Then another text. Then a call. She finally answered. "Yes," a voice said. "Penelope. It's Vanessa." Penelope's heart stopped. "How did you—" Vanessa interrupted. "Read your letter yet?" "Yes." "Good. Then listen." Penelope swallowed. "You're going to curate the exhibit." "What?" Penelope's voice cracked. "Yes." They asked. "And you accepted." Penelope didn't remember accepting, but apparently, she had. "It's not about redemption," Vanessa continued. "It's about transformation. You'll use that same wall where he hung, held, then thrown. You'll oversee the installation of the mug as a relic of that moment. You'll invite the students he represented to speak. You'll speak too about what you learned. Or should have. The panel isn't enough." Penelope's stomach turned. She realized this wasn't opportunity. It was accountability. Vanessa said, "The press release goes tomorrow. National. Your name will be attached to it. No edits." The call ended. Penelope closed her eyes. She understood something new. The canvas of her career, once based on control, was now guided by someone she wronged, and the exhibit was no longer hers. But she would run it. She had to. Back in New York, Malcolm wrapped up his studio session. His phone beeped. A single notification. "Producer has requested call re-Netflix doc." He paused. Tobias saw it. "That's big." Malcolm nodded, unsure. "I didn't apply." "No. They found you." Malcolm's heart pounded. He thought of the letter he left. The show. The gold leaf. He thought of all those who had told him he didn't matter. And now something else was happening. A new story. One that might change everything again. A Netflix producer had indeed made a call. But what they asked him to do next would force him to face something deeper than the mug, deeper than the dismissal, and deeper than the teacher who started it all. The lights in the studio were dim. A single projector stood ready, the screen stretched across the wall like a promise. The title appeared, "The Mug That Changed Everything." It was official now. A major streaming service had greenlit the documentary about Malcolm Reaves. What started as a moment of humiliation had turned into a movement. And Malcolm, the boy who once sat quietly in a classroom, was now helping shape how the world talked about value, race, art, and childhood. Malcolm stood behind a curtain, watching the final color grading pass on the monitor. His sketchbook lay open in front of him, its pages filled with truth, pain, hope, and now possibility. In that moment, he wasn't just the subject of a story, he was a storyteller. The world would see his voice, not through sound bites, not through pity, through his art, his vision, his journey. The producers approached him gently. "Malcolm, when the film premieres, we'll host a live stream with your mom, your mentor Tobias Lane, and selected classroom screenings across the country." They handed him a mock-up poster. His face, soft lighting, the hope mug cracked open in gold seams behind him. The tagline, "How one gift revealed what we take for granted." He traced the mug outline slowly, feeling the weight of the tagline. He thought of the class, the trash can, the apology, the letter. The journey felt long, but the change felt real. Across the country, his name was already embedded in curricula. Education forums released guides, teaching value Malcolm Reaves' art and social justice. Underfunded schools in urban and rural districts began applying for grants. A major foundation announced they would devote $10 million over 5 years to youth art inequity, citing his exhibit and story as inspiration. The donation that began as $100,000 had grown, expanded. It wasn't just money. It was rewriting what happened when someone said your $5 gift didn't matter. In his hometown, Maple Hill Elementary installed a new art and dialogue room, named the Reeves Space. Students painted large murals of mugs, feathers, and stars. The symbols Malcolm had drawn when he gave his teacher the mug, all of them now reclaimed. Parents who once whispered about his quiet hand-raising now used his story to teach their children about dignity, resilience, and hope. His mother Kenya watched from hundreds of miles away, tears in her eyes during every ribbon-cutting live stream, every press release. She felt proud. She felt exhausted. She felt like the war she'd fought in small rooms had rippled out to ocean. Penelope Carrington had withdrawn from public view. Her townhouse was dark, her LinkedIn profile silent, her teaching license quietly retired. She rarely allowed her name in the press again. But the world hadn't forgotten her. Her name was in footnotes now, cautionary ones. The story that had begun with her dismissal of a $5 gift now stood as proof of how power and bias hide behind decorum. Schools used her case in training seminars. When the teacher becomes the lesson. Unexpectedly, variants of Malcolm's story began appearing globally. A school in Cape Town renamed its art lab after the Mug of Hope. In Stockholm, students created a podcast about everyday gifts and hidden value. A film festival in Mumbai offered a prize for films inspired by small gestures, large meaning, citing Malcolm's forthcoming documentary. His singular gift had fractured across continents. It reached beyond race, beyond geography, into how humans define value when someone says your smallest thing doesn't count. And then came the twist. Exactly 1 year after the classroom incident, the museum in St. Louis, the same city where it had happened, announced they would display the actual mug, under glass, with a plaque reading now more valuable than it ever was. But when the exhibit opened, the curator's name surprised many. Not a celebrity, not Malcolm's mentor, but Penelope Carrington. She had accepted the role. She would oversee the installation of the very object she once dismissed. Many gasped. Some praised the symbolic transformation. Others condemned it as co-optation. But Malcolm, watching the announcement on his laptop from New York, simply exhaled. He sat next to Tobias in a studio lounge. "I never expected her to curate it," Malcolm said quietly. Tobias nodded. "Sometimes history demands you hold the mirror." Malcolm responded. "I'm not sure I want her handling the mug." Tobias paused. "Then talk to her about it." Malcolm looked down. He hadn't thought about conversation. He still carried the weight of his first silence. Even as global acclaim enveloped him, he felt the old pulse of anxiety. Would his story always mean so much that it drowned the child he once was? Would the memorialization of a single moment erase the years of quiet work he was still doing? He wondered if the world had jumped to the outcome, without allowing the struggle to breathe. His art now included the mug. It included the moment, but it also included nights of tears, nights of doubt, nights when the pencil didn't move. The film's premiere night arrived at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. The red carpet was awash with flashbulbs. Reporters, supporters. Malcolm walked in with Kenya and Tobias. He wore the scarf he'd made himself, the one with little mugs and stars printed by his hand. For once he felt like the person they came to see, not just the hero they wanted. He hugged his mother, smiled for cameras, greeted his mentor. Inside the screening hall, his piece held then throne hung as a backdrop. After the screening, the producer called him aside. "We want to bring you onto the team. A series, touring exhibitions, a children's book. You'd co-produce." Malcolm's heart pounded. "I'll think about it," he said. "I don't want to chase fame. I want to create change." The producer nodded. "Exactly why we want you." Kenya hugged him that night, in the lobby. There were tears, laughter, quiet pride, but she saw the look inside his eyes, a look of steady guard. She knew the real work wasn't over. The film was chapter, not the end. Back in St. Louis, Penelope Carrington watched the premiere live, via streaming link. She leaned forward in her chair, tears bounding fast. Not from relief, Not from regret, from something deeper, recognition. She had curated the exhibit. The mug she once dismissed now sat under glass. She knew the irony. She felt the shift, but fear flickered in her chest. What if her presence overshadowed his story? What if the hero became his teacher again? She returned to the email she had written the day before. Are we centering him or me? And she paused, unsent. In the production office in New York the next morning, Tobias checked the schedule. The first draft of the children's book had arrived. Malcolm's voice was in it, not just as the protagonist, but as author. He had insisted. The publisher agreed. The book, worth a boy, a mug, a world rewritten. It would release the next year, illustrated by Malcolm, in his new style, gold seams, shattered shadows, hopeful light. Tobias looked at Malcolm's sketches, then at the world outside the window. You're ready, he said. Malcolm exhaled. But readiness didn't mean he stopped feeling the tremors. There were nights when the old classroom came back to him. The whiteboard, the smug smile, the trash bin echo, the mug's cracked image, the children's laughter. Those nights he didn't draw. He sat in the dark and listened to memory. One afternoon, as Malcolm prepared a talk for grade 5 students about resilience, a reporter asked him, if you could take your first gift back, would you? He looked out at the assembled children, some shy, some bold, some curious. He smiled softly. No, he said, because it taught me what I was worth, and it taught me what I wouldn't accept. The room burst into applause. But inside, Malcolm thought about Penelope's letter, about the unsent reply, about the museum in St. Louis, and the curator's name, about the documentary, about the tear he shed in the dark, about the children holding symbolic items being mocked. His story had grown far beyond him, and yet he still carried the body of a child who once believed his gift was worthless. That night, Kenya sat on their living room couch. Her phone lit up with a notification trailer release for the documentary. She smiled, then fainted when she saw the view count 4.3 million, and climbing in the first hour. She laughed out loud, teared up, then set the phone down. She thought of Malcolm's letter, the wrapping paper, the word value. She thought of the mug behind glass, the children, the movement, and she whispered, you did it, baby. You did it. Malcolm texted her. Thank you for everything. She replied, I'll always carry you home. And deep inside Malcolm, the ache of whether this was enough still flickered. He walked out onto the gallery balcony, before dawn, looked at the city skyline. He thought about a child holding a mug, a teacher looking away, a mother keeping vigil, a woman rewriting her past. He felt the wind, he felt the gold seam, and he picked up his pencil, because the world was watching. And now the world would never look at a $5 gift the same way again. As the credits rolled on the documentary's trailer, a text popped on Malcolm's phone from a school district in Dallas. We'd like to use your story and that mug as part of an official apology to our students. Meet us. No child should have to prove their worth to be treated with dignity. If Malcolm's story moved you, remember his pain is still a reality for too many. Every silent moment, every dismissed voice, it all adds up. Type yes if you believe every child deserves to be seen. Subscribe if this broke your heart.